Welcome to another episode of the OpenSource Podcast. Today I'm joined by Kabir Mathur, co-founder and CEO of Leen Security. Kabir will share his journey about building Leen, overcoming early challenges, and innovating in the security data integration space. Kabir, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. The pleasure is mine.
Awesome. Well, Kabir, let's kick things off with, are you able to share your kind of story and career journey to date that's led you to founding Leen, and what inspired you to start this venture, and how has your journey been so far as a CEO and founder?
Yeah, sure thing. How far back do you want to go? I can start. I'll share this in a sort of nutshell for the folks that are listening. I always find it really interesting to learn about other folks' entrepreneurial journeys. So hopefully other people will find mine interesting as well. I'm originally from India. I grew up in Mumbai, and my dad was an entrepreneur. He was in the book publishing and preschool business. So growing up, I was always inspired by the things that he did and the type of businesses that he built. So you could say entrepreneurship has been in my blood from very early on. I moved from India to come here to the US in 2005. I did my undergrad out in Atlanta. And very early on, even there, I took some business and management courses, and there were a couple of entrepreneurship classes in particular that just got me hooked. And from that point on, I knew I only wanted to chart a path for myself to start my own company at some point, and I took what to me seemed like the logical steps to get there. So I started working for a gaming startup in Atlanta in right after graduating in 2009. And then I moved to the Bay Area in 2013. I worked for a couple of ad tech startups here. And then most recently, before starting Leen, I worked for a company called Typeform, where I was in product partnerships for them. So basically, it's been 15 years of working at various startups that have led to this point where I felt that I've gained enough sort of rounded experience, not only within different domains, but also within different practices within a business to take the leap of faith myself, start my own company. I, of course, have two great co-founders that I work with, Neil and Akash as well. When we came together as a team, roughly, let's say, I think it was about a year and a half ago, we're actually working on something completely different. We tried that idea for a couple of months, as a lot of founders do, and we didn't see the traction that really got us excited and that we thought would lead to the type of company that we wanted to build. And this particular idea, Leen, as you shared, this unified API for security data, had kind of been in the back of Neil's mind for a long time. He comes from the security space, and he's actually faced the frustration associated with this particular problem of tool sprawl within the security industry. And when we took a step back and started to think about this problem, of course, the market was fairly large and it got us pretty excited, but you also have to be very sure that there's founder market fit. Neil's background was obviously a really good fit, given that he's faced this problem firsthand. He has a security background. Akash has just been a really solid operator across different startups. So he's very flexible and is able to adapt to different situations in different industries. And in my case, I've spent the better part of the last decade working specifically on integrations, first within ad tech, and then in B2B SaaS, where at Typeform, for example, I stood up a couple hundred partnerships with other best-in-class SaaS companies like Salesforce and Canva and HubSpot and Notion and Zendesk and many, many others. So for me, it was just about redirecting that knowledge to a different domain, which is security. So all of these factors combined have sort of led me to where I am today.
That's fantastic, and it's so uncanny. We've got a trend of the guests that are founders that have come on the podcast here that have grown up with entrepreneurs in the family, right? And have grown up with that ingrained in them. And I think it builds a burning desire to found a business. My father too was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, grew multiple fashion businesses and apparel businesses. And now I feel like I feel like I'm realizing my kind of journey to that I was always kind of destined to be a founder myself in the recruitment space. So I think that's really interesting. What was some of the initial? You mentioned that you came together as a group of founders to work on a completely different problem set. You obviously have an incredible amount of startup experience. What were some of the initial challenges that you've seen? It doesn't need to just be across Lean, right? But as startups face that you think could help people in avoiding or finding solutions for as they begin their own founder journey.
Oh, there are so many, but I think the ones that are top of mind for me based on our experience, I think you should choose a market that's big enough. I know it sounds very obvious to say that, but very often founders, there's so much advice on how to found a company, and one of the pieces of advice that's pretty pervasive is you should solve a problem that you faced yourself, right? That some of the
Yeah.
best solutions, some of the most successful companies have come from that type of founding journey. But just because you face the problem doesn't mean that it's a large enough market. So I would say both factors are important. You need to go out and validate that not only do other people have this problem, but there are enough of those people to build at least a venture-backed company, right? That's what we're doing at Lean. We're trying to build a venture-backed business. Lifestyle businesses are a little bit different. You can, of course, go after a very small kind of niche market and build a really nice business. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I just think you have to understand what type of business to build. And then I think validation, you have to do that really well. There are great books in this, like the Mom Test, and I think really good product folks know how to extract these insights really well. So when you talk to your customers, it's not like they're gonna just share with you a specific solution that you need to build. And if they do, you probably shouldn't over-index on that, right? Because you want to go after a pretty broad persona and you want to understand their specific pain points, read between the lines, and understand what problems they're actually trying to solve. Because they might say one thing, but there's actually a totally different problem underneath the surface that you might have to work a little bit to extract out of them. And based on that, come up with your solution. And of course, you want to measure as much as possible how much they're willing to pay for that solution. I think these steps are really critical to get right in the very early days of a startup to validate that this idea that you might think is great, which is how founders should operate, right? You have to be extremely, extremely optimistic to be a founder, but you have to balance that with the reality of what your customers are telling you and make sure that some of these macro factors are working in your favor as well.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and I think it's really interesting that one thing that really drew me to building a relationship with you guys and Lean as a company is when I, having spent the last 3 years working very closely with security leaders and security professionals, when I kind of talked about Lean and the problem you guys were looking to solve, the excitement that kind of came over every security professional's face of kind of solving this security data integrations challenge and space was really prevalent. And I think it's one that's really exciting. So, are you able to explain a little bit more in depth around Lean? And you mentioned kind of um, you know some of the solutions from a very high level, but the specific problems you're addressing in the space and how the solutions stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the core problem that we're trying to solve is that of tool sprawl within security. And the way you quantify that is at this point, there are about 4,000 security vendors, and many of them are multi-product. So there are close to 10,000 security products out there. Now, this creates a really big problem for two segments of the market. Both other security product companies who need to build and maintain integrations with the rest of the ecosystem, because the nature of security is such that the data is very interconnected. Right? You can't just look at a particular attack or an incident in isolation. You have to look at a lot of different sources of data, correlate those to understand really what's happened and how you resolve it. So that's one segment. And the other is the enterprise security teams themselves that often have a very large stack of security tools that they're dealing with. I think the number at this point is somewhere between 50 and 75 for enterprise security teams. We've actually talked to a few companies where that number goes into the hundreds. So it's really hard for these teams as well to wrangle the data from so many different point solutions, build some type of correlation engine, and only then does the data become useful for them to advance their security programs. Another thing that accentuates this problem is that security as a whole doesn't have a common data schema. So every product company can have their own output of what they consider to be an alert, how this alert is formatted. So there's a lot of data engineering work that has to go into first normalizing this data into some kind of format that can be vendor agnostic and go across all of these different products. And only then does the data become useful for you to automate some workflows or do an investigation or whatever the ultimate purpose may be. So that's the problem that Lean solves. When we say we're building a unified API for security data, really what that means is we build and maintain connectors with a lot of the major players in the security industry. So you can think of CrowdStrike and SentinelOne and Tenable and Qualys and Sneak and dozens of others. We are responsible for keeping those connectors, those integrations up to date because these APIs keep changing. We go out and procure partnerships with every one of these different vendors. So we get notified if they're making breaking changes to their APIs. And we also normalize the data that they're producing over these APIs into common data schemas. So our customers only have to integrate with Lean's common data model. And regardless of where the data is coming from, they know what it's going to look like because it's very predictable. We take on that heavy sort of data engineering work because security people, as much as they have to deal with data engineering issues, are not really data engineers. So that's how we think of ourselves is can we abstract away a lot of these pain points that are necessary for these teams to do, but are not really what their core competency is. So in a nutshell, that's what we do today. We work with about just under 20 customers. They're all other security product companies at the moment, but we are starting to have POC discussions with security teams directly as well to see how they might be able to utilize something like Lean within their environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's obviously there's all the obvious solutions there and benefits that any security team can leverage: better data, better integration, etc. I think one of the other ones though that's probably a little more left field is security buy-in, right? And being able to take data from your security program and what's actually happening to the business to present back up to boards as well, which is really exciting. And I
Yeah.
think will be very welcomed from many security leaders across the space. Fantastic. And how did so obviously you've come up with, let's rewind a little bit. You've built the vision, and now you need to go out and you need to raise capital. What was your funding journey like? I love some of the stories around funding and how you ended up landing on the three venture partners that you've got that are great.
Yeah. So I'll actually talk a little bit about our funding journey with the previous idea because I think it's really night and day difference in the way that the experiences went, right? This is part of the reason why we pivoted away from that idea, which by the way was in the AI space, like a lot of people are building in AI right now. We had come up with this idea soon after ChatGPT launched, and we were trying to think of a vertical SaaS solution that this could apply to, and we decided to build for customer success teams, the post-sales folks at SaaS companies, because to us it was an underserved market and they do a lot of repetitive tasks. And our hypothesis was you can use AI to automate a lot of these tasks. We went and talked to a lot of customers, of course. In parallel, we talked to VCs because as a very early stage startup, you have to test both segments and make sure that people are interested. I kid you not, we must have talked to close to 100 VCs and we heard 100 no's. I have to say, VCs can be pretty creative with the way they say no to you. And we must have seen every version of that during that journey. So obviously, we were pretty dejected from hearing all of that, and we weren't getting much traction on the customer side either. So Neil had this idea in the back of his mind, as I mentioned before, based on his previous experience at a company called BlueVoyant, which is a large managed detection and response provider, where he was responsible for building out a lot of these integrations with dozens of different tools to serve their customer base of close to 1,000 customers. So we started with that hypothesis. We started testing it with customers, and we knew we were onto something when a discovery call, or at least what we thought was a discovery call with the founder of another company, actually turned into an investment call. At the end of it, he said, I love this. You guys are onto something. Would you take a check? I'll write you a check today. And we just, I mean, our jaws must have hit the floor. We tried to be as coy as we possibly could. But I mean, of course, we said yes because he's a really well-connected person, and things just snowballed from there. Because he's so well-connected, he's a founder of another security company. He was able to introduce us to his VCs and to a bunch of other angels, and it really was like a snowball effect from there, where folks started getting really, really excited about what we were building. We managed to raise from a handful of angels, all of whom had amazing levels of credibility. Like we raised from folks that come from Netflix's security team, which has this legendary status in the industry of being an elite security team. So being able to go to the next set of angels and VCs and say we already have the backing of these folks gave us a huge amount of credibility. And by the way, we didn't have anything at this point other than a concept. We didn't even put together a deck. We literally raised on a memo. So we just wrote a Google Doc that was 5, 6 pages long that talked about the market, that talked about our solution. The classic type of things you'd find in a deck, but I think this is actually a more powerful way to raise when you are so early on because you get to articulate some of these points in a lot more detail than what you could capture on a slide with 3 or 4 bullet points. We even included FAQs, some of the details on our raise and things like that. And yeah, I would say in roughly a month and a half, 2 months, we were able to secure our round. So we raised initially from these angels. They introduced us to a handful of VCs. We were introduced to 11 Capital, who's our lead investor. Actually, I think they heard about us somehow and they reached out. And within a week or so, we had a term sheet in front of us. And we had a couple of other VCs from Inner Capital and Preface Ventures also come into the round and participate. But yeah, it was I've never raised money before, nor had Akash or nor Neil, and I think this experience was relatively smooth compared to what I've heard from some of the other founders we know, and also what we experienced with the previous idea.
Absolutely. That is so left of field, and your unintentional strategy, let's call it that, of speaking to founders and validating your idea and vision, and then bringing that background to, okay, how can that actually work for us to go to venture groups, and leveraging those angel profiles is incredible. And I know exactly who you're talking about, and they're a group of incredible humans. And yeah, that's fantastic. I love that, and it also shows. I was at SF Tech Week last week. We bumped into each other, and I think so many people go through the same linear route of I need a deck, I need to just meet VCs, and I'm going to queue up and speak with one investor from Andreessen Horowitz or from Lightspeed Ventures. Whereas, like, actually, there is many different ways to go about gaining funding, and there's always the idea of actually that repeat founders find things easier, and I think that can be the case. But also, I think if you can think outside the box a little and go and validate your business with the right people, it can come back around and work really well. No, that's fantastic. And maybe we should do a segment as well in each episode moving forward of like what was the most creative no that you ever had from a venture capital firm. That'd be quite a fun thing to do with all the founders that we have on.
Yeah, I'll have to think back on those, but yeah, I'm sure there are some very creative ones.
Absolutely. Well, look, there's you mentioned, and it wouldn't be a tech podcast if we didn't bring it up. You mentioned AI there. What role do you think AI is going to play in security data or data integration space down the line? And are you guys already thinking about that? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think it's really hard to ignore AI these days, but I'd say you shouldn't force it, and that's how we've thought about it at Lean. We work already with companies that are utilizing AI to automate other security workflows. So in a sense, we're involved in that way, but we haven't used it within our product necessarily yet.
Yes.
We have experimented with it, which I'll share a little bit about. But for example, we're working with a SOC automation company, right? That essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to automate the role of a level one analyst that usually operates within these SOC teams using AI. So can the AI agent triage the alerts that are coming out of your EDR and your vulnerability management solution and contextualize it and only let a human know when it's a real issue versus most of the alerts that are just noise, right? So in that sense, this company is using Lean's integrations to power that flow because guess what? With AI is only as good as the data that you feed to it. So giving AI a normalized data model that can is vendor agnostic and can pull data from any sort of source and is very predictable to the AI agent is really powerful. So we see our role in the ecosystem being a little bit more foundational. But in the future, I absolutely think that we'll be able to leverage AI as well. Maybe it's something that we can use to speed up our connector development by, in theory, throwing a bunch of API docs at it and helping us come up with a normalized model. We've tried that, by the way, and I just don't think AI is good enough yet. It actually slows us down. So a human has to be involved in that process at the moment because the complexity of what we're doing is quite high. And I have no doubt that AI will get there at some point, but it's just not there yet. And I also think in the future, with security teams in particular, we could offer them AI modules that they can apply to different types of internal security applications that they're building on top of our data layer and essentially build end-to-end applications that are powered by AI. So yeah, I think there's a really exciting future ahead. At Lean in particular, we're just not there yet, where we feel that leveraging AI today will significantly accelerate us.
Yeah, totally. I think a theme I've heard over the last few weeks, there's so much out there of like they're not there yet to replace humans within. Let's take the SOC example you mentioned. They're not there to replace, etc. They're not there. Yeah, well, no, of course we're not. We're building, and the AI has got to be there, right, for all these new companies to achieve that overall automation. But I think where the real value is, and like you say, I don't think you can completely remove humans. Is how do we drive efficiency? How do we drive speed, etc., and work with humans to do that. So no, that's really cool. Well, switching gears a little bit, Kabir, into my world of talent. How did you, I suppose, design the roadmap for this crucial component of any startup success? And what was your approach to building a team out?
Yeah, it's so important. I think Akash, one of my co-founders, recently posted about our first hire who just completed his first year with us, just this week actually. And the people you hire really, especially so early on, we're a team of three, and this was our fourth hire, and we're still a small team. We're a team of 8 people, so every hire is setting the bar for the rest of the team. So one way we think about it is, if we hire this person, will they raise the bar for the rest of the team, right? So that's of course one component. There's so many others that I can talk about, but really I would say we we look at, of course, the person has to be smart. They have to have a core competency around whatever role we're hiring for. So far, we've largely hired folks in engineering because we're a very developer-focused product, and that's most of the talent that we need. But we really heavily index on someone that is naturally curious. I think there's three factors: natural curiosity, adaptability, and work ethic. To me, those three components together are the greatest predictor of success within a startup. Because if you're curious to learn about a problem, you'll go do it, right? You'll use ChatGPT. You'll do all the research on the problem, even if you know nothing about it, and no one else in the company knows anything about it, which, by the way, happens all the time at startups. You'll adapt to different situations because your role so early on in a company will not be the same when at our, we're 50 people, for example, or 100 people. So you'll have to adapt your role. And the third is work ethic, right? You won't give up. You'll persist no matter what, and you'll run through walls to figure out a particular problem or do something for a customer. And if all of those three things are true and someone can exhibit those values to us, then we know they're going to be extremely successful. So we've heavily designed our hiring process to over-index on those factors. And we've got folks from a mix of different places. Our first hire actually reached out to us, which is very surprising for a startup that very few people would have heard of. And it was amazing. It was such a good fit. That almost never happens. We have hired using an agency as well, and then we've of course tapped into our own network. So those have kind of been the three channels that we've utilized so far, and I think it's going to be that type of mix for us going forward for, let's say, the next 20, 30, 40 employees that we hire.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think you've assembled a fantastic team, but also you're able to lean on your experiences as founders, and that skills matrix as founders works really, really well and super harmonious at Leen. When do you start thinking about the other departments? So you talked about like engineering has been a big focus thus far. I know you've been doing a lot of founder-led sales. What does that look like from? Do you have priorities in terms of your roadmap? And this is to advise other founders that listen to the podcast. But what does that look like? When you think about go to market, sales, maybe a people function, finance, etc. Have you got a roadmap built out years ahead, or is that kind of right now we're just focusing on our engineering hires?
Yeah, it's hard to build anything years ahead at
Yeah,
such an early stage startup. Of course, we think about it, but I'd say this really varies based on what type of startup you're building and also your composition as a founding team. In our case, we have a good mix of technical and business development, sales, marketing type of experience. So we don't necessarily feel like we need help, at least in the short term, on the GTM side. Akash and I are leading the sales and marketing efforts. We will augment some of our efforts with contractors, for example, that have experience in specific areas like SEO and things like that, where it makes sense to get someone on at least temporarily. For finance, we use a firm that does this for early stage startups, so we don't see that necessarily as being a core hire that we need to make in the short term. Definitely, we'll continue to hire engineers probably with different skill sets. Right now, we're completely a back-end API-driven service. We will have some type of front-end component and library that we build over time, so we'll get either full stack or front-end engineers on board. We will likely hire a product person in the near future because we want someone to focus on this enterprise motion and work very closely with our initial set of enterprise customers and design products for them. Our customer base is growing, which is a good problem to have. So we'll likely need someone that can do technical support, but also double up as a sales engineer for us. So those are some of the hires who are top of mind for us at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It's good to hear kind of your take on it, because I get the question so many times from founders of when should we start thinking about these other functions? Should it be right now? I have a lot of startups that I'm speaking to who are looking to come out of Europe. They've spun up in Europe. They've raised their seed or pre-seed around there, and they're going to attack the US market naturally. Obviously, it's such a large market. But there maybe is a priority to hire somebody on the go-to-market side who can bring in the network, on the sales side, who can bring in the network, can help build the customer base out here in the US. So like you said, it is very dependent on where you are in your journey and circumstance. But I think that's great insights into how you guys are approaching things. Well, Kabir, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're a gent. I really appreciate you coming on to the Open Source Podcast. A massive thank you. And I think the journey today has been an exciting one with Leen, and I know you've landed some incredible customers in the last 12 months of operation, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for security and data integrations. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring stories from inspiring entrepreneurs and innovators to the rest of the tech ecosystem. So until next time, keep exploring and embracing your intrigue, and keep innovating. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bruce.